समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
This week, the Supreme Court will begin hearing petitions asking for statehood to be restored to Jammu and Kashmir. A promise that's been made by the Solicitor General in earlier hearings before the court and in public by both the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Home Minister Amit Shah. The real problem in Kashmir, though, goes much deeper than one just to do with the division of powers between state and centre. From the outset, both New Delhi and Srinagar colluded to strangle democracy in the state, fearing in disturbed times that it would facilitate Pakistan's jihad across the line of control. The outcome has been the creation of a polity that has lost both its resilience and its hopes. Can statehood be a first step forward to healing the wounds? Late one night in 1978, in a nation illuminated by the end of the emergency, police dragged Ghulam Nabi Patel out of his home in Srinagar's Batmalu and into the city's central jail. Leviathan still cast a long shadow in this corner of the republic, it became clear. The head of the Kashmir Motor Drivers Association, it emerged, had campaigned for the Janta Dal in the just concluded elections. The action enraged Prime Minister, as he was then known, Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah, enough to make the trade union leader the first victim of Kashmir's just legislated preventive detention law, the infamous Public Safety Act. The High Court ordered Ghulam Nabi's release, but that wasn't quite the end of the story. In 2018, the elderly politician, battling cancer on a trip home to arrange his daughter's wedding, was shot dead by terrorists. This time, the political parties he'd served for decades, the Congress and the People's Democratic Party, denied their association with him so they would not have to condemn the terrorists. And the last bit of that story remains. In 2020, Ghulam Nabi's children were served notice by the government, ordering them to vacate the premises they were provided to protect them from terrorist attack. This week, the Supreme Court is scheduled to resume hearing petitions seeking the restoration of Jammu and Kashmir's statehood, an issue the court elided over in its earlier judgment after 32 paragraphs of elegant prose in return for a promise from the Solicitor General. The decision to hear the issue is obviously an important one, but it also brushes over a critical issue. The demotion of Kashmir to the status of a union territory isn't the only problem that needs to be discussed as India moves forward to reimagine its constitutional relationship with the once was a state. Kashmir has never been, in any sense of the word, allowed to be a normal state with normal politicians and normal citizens. The state might have been the first to get rural radio sets, as scholar Navneeta Chadda Behra reminds us. But authorities were careful to disable the tuners with wire so as to ensure only Radio Kashmir could be heard. Yeah, there were elections to the Constituent Assembly in 1951, but the politician Syed Mir Qasim observed at that time that there were notices posted over all the walls ordering people not to discuss politics. I don't see that anywhere else in the country. Thus, Kashmir was bound to the Republic not just with ideas and culture, but with terror and blood. For this, the long jihad Pakistan unleashed against Kashmir in 1947-1948 and has since continued without interruption must be held responsible. Like many other regions in India, from the Adivasi heartlands of central India to parts of the northeast, democracy has had to struggle to grow in exceptionally unwelcoming soil. All blame, though, does not lie across the line of control. Elections that serve to undermine democracy, the state-enabled subversion of the political system through corruption, the use of coercion unconstrained by law, All these, the story of Ghulam Nabi Patel should remind us, were Indian inventions. Today, the challenge thus isn't just to restore statehood to Kashmir. The task Indians and India need to embrace is to build a state that is Indian, an unremarkable, ordinary part of our republic. 80 years ago, Prime Minister Abdullah had promised that a utopia would be built from the ruins of partition and war. The Naya Kashmir Manifesto, which journalist Andrew Whitehead reminds us liberally helped itself to text from the 1936 Constitution of the Soviet Union, held out promises to redistribute feudal landholdings to the peasants, to uphold the rights of women, and introduce universal access to healthcare and education. The communist couple Frida Hulston and her husband Baba Pyarelal Bedi wrote the manifesto with Abdullah's encouragement, although it's not very clear if Abdullah himself was as seriously committed to communism as he was. To the great Kashmiri poet Ghulam Ahmad Mahjoor, it seemed Abdullah was leading the region out of a long darkness. The ranges of the mountains shall yield gold, he gushed. Pearls shall emerge out of the Wooler Lake. Less than 5 years after independence, though, the poet had encountered bitter disillusionment. The reality of New Kashmir or Naya Kashmir, it turned out, was one-party authoritarianism, electoral malpractice, and communalism. You'll find her camping in the homes of a chosen few alone. How did this come about? The story has something to do with bad luck. The scholar Ejaz Ahmad Wani has written in an excellent survey of the roots of misadministration in Kashmir. Two successive bad harvests in 1949-1950 and 1950-1951 created a lot of rural discontent. The government was forced to levy or seize crops from farmers, a measure imposed in a desperate effort to stave off starvation in urban areas. That sharpened the resentment of the countryside, while shortages of food in the cities still grew to alarming levels. The National Conference succeeded in dominating the Constituent Assembly, winning all 75 seats in the 1951 elections. This was only possible though because 45 out of 49 candidates of the Hindu nationalist Praja Parishad party were barred from contesting, mainly on frivolous technical grounds, Behra has observed. The media was muzzled and opponents were intimidated and imprisoned. Less than 5 years later though, the relationship between Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru, which enabled this malpractice, had begun to break down. The Praja Parishad, denied electoral space, started a mass movement seeking the full integration of Kashmir into India. Abdullah, in a 10 April 1952 speech in Ranbir Singhpura, suggested it was becoming impossible to, I quote, convince the Muslims of Kashmir that India does not intend to swallow them up. The threat of war with Pakistan was alive, and Nehru could not countenance this kind of language. I am afraid Kashmir is heading in an adverse direction, Nehru warned in a 28 June 1953 letter. Following several failures to secure a rapprochement with Abdullah, the Intelligence Bureau facilitated an intra-party coup which deposed him in September 1953, just 2 years after that Constituent Assembly. The new regime of Prime Minister Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad came to power on the back of a unanimous vote of confidence from Jammu and Kashmir's Constituent Assembly. Unanimous, yeah, because many of the members who voted for the government had been released from prison that very day. Early in 1954, the Union government restricted Kashmir's special status by passing constitutional amendments that cut back the state's autonomy. Long before Kashmir's special status finally ended, 260 of the 395 articles of the Indian Constitution were already applicable in Jammu and Kashmir. The remaining 135 were all identical provisions to the Indian Constitution found in the Constitution of Jammu and Kashmir. So there was no autonomy. Like his predecessor and incarcerated friend Abdullah, Bakshi hoped development would subsume the urge for political agency and dialogue. The plan failed. In 1963, mass protests which followed the disappearance of a relic from the shrine of Hazrat Bal in Srinagar led the government to quite simply be swept aside. A parallel government made up of Abdullah and the clerics Mirwais Maulvi Farooq and Maulvi Muhammad Saeed Masoodi had to step in to restore order, regulate prices, and even get the police to direct traffic. The prominent Congress politician Ghulam Sadiq, Behra records, wrote a very sharp letter to Prime Minister Nehru. One of the beliefs which have been commonly entertained in the past is that the influence of Pakistan on the Kashmiri Muslims is fairly wide and firmly rooted. From this belief has stemmed a primordial fear of the people. He was right, and India never really got over this. Few lessons were learned from the bitter experience of 1963, sadly. Large-scale state repression of opponents continued. In one case, Supreme Court records show, the politician Ghulam Nabi Zaki was held under the Preventive Detention Act of 1964 without the state government even troubling itself to serve him the grounds of his arrest. Later, in court, the government argued that no grounds could be disclosed without compromising the security of the state. So he couldn't know why he was in jail and argued that he shouldn't be there. Then in 1974, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi finally allowed Abdullah's release, but subject to his signing an agreement which led him to merge the National Conference into her Congress party. This ceded the entire opposition space in Kashmir to right-wing clerical forces, which would eventually form what we later came to know as the All Parties Hurriyat Conference or the secessionists, as well as their allied ethnic Kashmiri jihadist groups. Another rigged election in 1987 added to the frustrations of the opposition, providing an opportunity for jihadism to find a large number of recruits among the youth. Like Indians everywhere, Kashmiris today seek the right to speak their minds, to vote for who they wish, and to tune their radio sets, so your generation has mobile phones, to content of their choice. They resent arbitrary detention, indiscriminate violence, and a security apparatus that sometimes seem to have been liberated from the laws of our own republic. These demands cannot and ought not be made contingent on the behavior of Pakistani generals. Kashmiris need to be embraced by India's political system and treated like all other citizens. The Supreme Court could lay the foundations for a Kashmir that looks a little more like it did in 2019, but it's worth remembering that was no ideal. There is hard political work ahead that needs to involve us all if the wounds of 8 decades are to be healed. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor with ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.